when it comes to God's definition of love, I talked about it last week how God's love is an agape love. And by agape love, I mean it is an unconditional love based on the character of the one expressing the love. It loves whether the person being loved deserves it or not because they have been chosen to be loved by God. Now, I believe that this agape love of God is expressed in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, 4 through 8. And I said, when you read it, instead of saying love is, swap that out with God is always, and then see how the verse expresses itself to you. And I'll do that right now. So 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, if we say God is always in place of love, think about it this way. God is always patient. God is always kind. God does not envy. God does not boast. God is not proud. God does not dishonor others. God is not self-seeking. God is not easily angered. God keeps no records of wrongs. God does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. God always protects. God always trusts. God always hopes. God always perseveres. God never fails. That changes things a little bit too. Now, when you think about the agape love of God, one thing we didn't talk about is what is the opposite of the agape love of God? Well, I personally believe that it is pride. Pride is defined as exaltation. This is an excessively intensified sense of power or importance. Arrogance, an attitude of superiority manifested in an overbearing manner or in presumptuous claims or assumptions. Now, I believe that we can see pride or the fruit of pride written about in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Now, if we read there, we see that it says, "You should know this, Timothy, that in the last days there will be very difficult times. For people will love only themselves and their money. They will be boastful and proud, scoffing at God, disobedient to their parents, and ungrateful. They will consider nothing sacred. They will be unloving and unforgiving. They will slander others and have no self-control. They will be cruel and hate what is good. They will betray their friends. They will be reckless, be puffed up with pride, and love pleasure rather than God. They will act religious, but they will reject the power that can make them godly. Stay away from people like that. They are the kind who work their way into people's homes and win the confidence of vulnerable women who are burdened with the guilt of sin and controlled by various desires. Such women are forever following new teachings, but they are never able to understand the truth. These teachers oppose the truth just as Jannes and Jambres opposed Moses. They have depraved minds and a counterfeit faith." Now, if we compare agape love to pride, we can go through 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verses 4 through 8, and see the counter to that in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 through 8. Love is described as being always patient. This means that it's calm self-restraint from punishing others either physically or emotionally for a wrong suffered or for a mistake made. It's always forgiving. However, pride is never patient with mistakes, retaliates when a wrong is suffered. And we see that in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, where it talks about in the last days, people will always be cruel. That is the opposite of always being patient. Then we see where agape love is always kind. This means that it's goodness of heart expressed in actions for another's benefit. However, pride is never kind or interested in another's benefit. And we see in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 4, where it says they will always betray their friends. Well, you're not kind if you're always betraying your friend. Agape love is never jealous or envious. This is described as not being resentfully desirous of another's advantages, possessions, or gifts, not desirous of another's good that oneself cannot achieve or not have. However, pride is always jealous and envious of others' good fortune. And we see that in 2 Timothy 3, verse 2, where it says that people are ungrateful and thankless, not content with what they have. So if you're not content with what you have, that means that you're jealous or envious. You're not loving these people. Then we see where agape love is never boastful or arrogant. This means that it never seeks to exalt self or is puffed up with pride and self-importance over nothing. However, pride, on the other hand, is always boastful and arrogant. It must be the center of attention. And we see this with 2 Timothy 3, verse 4, where it says they will be puffed up with pride. And I think of people who are law keepers or people that think they've obeyed God when they're not doing it. And then they have this self-righteous religious pride, which they project on other people. Now, if we move on, agape love seeks not its own. This is described as it does not insist on having its own way or rights. It looks out for the interest of others. However, pride, on the other hand, always demands its own way, and it always looks out for its own interest. And we see this in 2 Timothy 3, verse 2, where it talks about, for people will love only themselves. If you're loving only yourself, that means you're seeking your own and you're not looking out for others. Agape love is not provoked. This means it's never easily stirred to anger, never touchy or quick-tempered. However, pride, on the other hand, always is easily provoked, touchy, oversensitive, angry. We see this in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 3, where it says they have no self-control. Well, if you have no self-control, that means you're easily provoked and easily stirred to anger. Agape love never takes into account a wrong suffered. This means that it bears a wrong without holding it against the one who committed it. It never holds grudges, maintains a forgiving spirit, keeps no records of wrongs. However, pride, on the other hand, always holds grudges and maintains a records of people's wrongs. But we see this in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 2-3, where it says they will be unloving and unforgiving. That's pretty self-explanatory. We see that agape love never rejoices in unrighteousness. This means that it views sin as God does. It is never glad over someone else's mistakes or sins. However, pride always rationalizes or ignores sin, rejoices over others' mistakes and sins. And we see that in 2 Timothy 3, verse 3, where it talks about they hate what is good. If you hate what is good, that means that you are not rejoicing with the truth in that sense. Then if we move on, we see agape love always rejoices with the truth. And this means that it's defined as rejoices in all that is found in Christ and his word, and others becoming more loving like God is loving. But we see that pride never rejoices with the truth and resents others being used of God. And we see this in 2 Timothy 3, verse 8, where it says, these teachers oppose the truth. That's pretty self-explanatory. If you're opposing the truth, you're not going to be rejoicing with the truth, as we see is expressed in agape love of God. We also see that the agape love of God bears all things. This means it endures any hardships for another's good, and it carries another's burdens. However, when we look at pride never endures anything. It's not worried about carrying the burden of someone else. And in this sense, you can see in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 6, where it says they are the kind who work their way into people's homes and win the confidence of vulnerable women who are burdened with the guilt of sin and controlled by various desires. They're looking to take advantage of people who are burdened with sins, not to bear those sins or bear the brunt with them and with their suffering. That is the exact opposite of agape love. We also see where agape love believes all things. This means they think the best of other people for Christ's sake. It gives others the benefit of the doubt. But pride always thinks the worst of others in this sense. So they basically are not believing all things in this sense. What this means, basically, we see in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 8, where it says they have depraved minds, corrupt minds, reprobate minds, morally corrupt scoundrels. So you can't believe all things or be always trustful, depending on what version of 1 Corinthians chapter 13 you're looking at. So basically, you're not believing all things in that sense. Then we move on to where it says agape love hopes all things. This means it holds fast to God's promises, hopes for the best for others. However, pride doubts the promises of God. It hopes for the best for themselves, for the individual, not for the best of others. And we see this in 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 2, where it says, for people will love only themselves and their money. they are self-seeking in this manner. If you're self-seeking, you're not being hopeful for all things. You're not always hopeful in that sense. And also if we move on, we see that love always perseveres. Agape love always perseveres. It never fails. This means that it endures through every circumstance, and the love that it expresses lasts forever. This is the love of God that he has for us, that it endures through every circumstance and it lasts forever. However, when it comes to pride, I think the entire passage of 2 Timothy 3:1-8 is about that, because if you scoff at God, only love yourself, are ungrateful, have a depraved mind, are cruel, hate what is good, betray your friends, take advantage of people, burdened with guilt, and so on, you are not enduring with them through every circumstance or loving them forever. So that's what we see. And that we see that saying it will happen in the last days, where you see prideful people are full of themselves, only worried about what they can get out of things. And they want to force themselves on others. We see them indulging in sin and proud of it, expressing it, wanting others to love them for their sin and encourage them in their sin. This is what pride is all about. So in conclusion, if you go to 2 Timothy chapter 3, verse 9, it says, but they won't get away with this for long. Someday everyone will recognize what fools they are, just as with Jannes and Jambres. And I think about Proverbs 16:18, where it said, pride goes before destruction and haughtiness before a fall. These prideful people are being found out right in front of our eyes, and they don't even know that they are. They constantly just want to focus on themselves, so enamored with their sin and what they are doing that they do not believe that they're heading for destruction, even though those who are trying to love them are trying to express this love to them and point them in a different direction, trying to point them away from their sin. But yet they are so proud of it, so caught up in it, that they are just going to go head over heels into destruction. And we almost have to encourage them to do that, so they will see the terrible results of their sin, and hopefully there will still be time for them to repent of their sin and to accept the gospel and come to faith in Jesus Christ. Because love builds up, but pride destroys. Eventually the proud will destroy themselves, either through life teaching them this lesson, the sin they're going through, or when they come face to face with God. However, hopefully when they come face to face to God, it will be on this side of the grave and not on the next. Because after they die and are humbled by God and what he says, it'll be too late, because they will be faced with a Christless eternity in hell. So pride may be the most terrible sin one can be involved in, because it rejects the agape love of God. It focuses on people wanting to love themselves and to indulge their flesh. So that's why we have to keep standing firm on the love of God, keep trying to be forgiving, keep trying to be loving towards these people, in hopes that it breaks them down and they will come to the end of themselves. But if it doesn't, we have to almost let them go, just like God says he gave people over to a reprobate mind in Romans 1. You almost have to let people go and let them find out for themselves how terrible a sin pride is and what it's leading them to do, and pray for them and hope they come to the end of themselves and fall into the loving hands of God. I hope that helps you out. Have a good day.